everybody. Welcome back to episode 4 of PowerTech with your solution engineers. We are fortunate today to have a crew with us as we talk about episode 4, which is going to be the next chapter, proactive change for successful schools. So we're going to talk about what has happened over the last 9 months or so in education with COVID, right? We all had to be reactive in a very, very drastic shift in how education was delivered, organized, a variety of different things. And what we want to talk about now is what have we learned? And as we talk about change management, to how we can continue to be successful moving forward. So I have a great panel with us. We have Jason Springel, who is a fellow solution strategy director, Kellie Ady, fellow solution strategy director, and Matt Childers. First time on the show to Matt and Jason. So welcome and thank you both for taking the time. So what we want to do is talk again a lot about the change management components, what we're seeing in the industry, some best practices, and how you might want to start thinking about, well, what are we going to do now that we've made it through the major shifts? And, we're going back and forth. My kids personally are virtual right now fully, but we've been in school, we've been virtual. Things are continuing to shift. So how do we manage that? So I'm going to kick it over to Kellie first. And the question I have for her is, what do districts look at to start, manage, and then carry change forward? There's a lot of factors that come into play. And if we just make changes, folks are wondering, well, why are we doing them? And there's a lot of confusion. So what can we do, Kellie, to really make sure that as we implement these changes, that they're successful, that they stick, and that everyone is on the same page when it comes to vision and what type of culture we want to have at our schools?
Well, I think there are a couple of pretty valuable tools and resources out there that can really support thinking through some of that. And I know that in the pre-COVID times, when we would think through long-term and change and managing that for schools and organizations and districts, we relied on some research from Hall and Horde. And they did some pretty extensive research in K-12 on what strategies do we really need to have in place to make sure that we successfully change to impact student learning. So I think it's good to start there because it really lays out what are those 6 things we need to focus on for the long term. And I think the first 2 that are on there are ones that are really worth diving into even more deeply, which is, talking about that vision and having a context that is conducive to change. And, speaking of that, another resource that I think is fantastic is actually out of the Harvard Business School, and it's from Heifetz and Linsky, and it's their work on adaptive leadership. And we actually studied as part of our equity work. But one of the things that they talk about is identifying, when you're looking at change, which things are technical and which things are adaptive. And I think what we've just experienced with COVID is we had to do some very rapid changes, and a lot of them were technical. It was getting devices out to kids, or figuring out if we're going to have enough Wi-Fi in place, and even getting tools. But the adaptive change, that's the changes in instruction. You and I were in a conversation yesterday, Justin. We talked about that seismic shift that's going to happen with learning. Now we've got to focus on the adaptive challenges of changing the way we think about learning as a result of this. There are some very positive things that are going to happen here. Getting back then into this idea of vision, there's a great graphic that I think a lot of people are familiar with. It's the Noster change model graphic. And it basically talks about different ingredients for managing complex change, and then what happens if one is missing. And it's super helpful. It's a really nice visual, I think, especially for people that work with staff and with schools, because they can listen for certain things. So if you hear people that are frustrated, you can think about, are we lacking some resources that people need? Or, probably more importantly, if somebody asks, why are we doing this? That's a huge red flag that you haven't done the groundwork that's needed to really talk about the vision and the why. So I think even looking at that graphic and stepping through what are the different elements here and how can we address those would be super helpful, looking beyond where we are now. And then finally, getting back to the Hall and Horde research, they have a change model that's come out of that called the concerns-based adoption model. It's a mouthful. I call it CBAM. But it has basically 3 different dimensions of change that we should be thinking about as we are working with people, because change is a very personal process. So the first part of that is basically a cognitive understanding of what the change is going to look like to get from where we are now to really innovating. And that's called innovation configuration mapping. They kind of look like rubrics when you lay them out. It's like basically it's a progression of behaviors of what do we want people to see. You just can't tell people go be innovative and then expect them to understand what that means. So part of it's just identifying where are we starting and where do we want to end up and what are the steps in between. The second dimension of that is the kind of the emotional or affective domain, which is the concerns, the stages of concern, which is where we get the term concerns based. And what's great about that one is it helps you think through what communication strategies do we need to have in place so people understand what's coming. So it steps everywhere from just being aware that something's coming to then all the way to how can I use this better? So how, where are we in those stages of concern? That'd be a great thing to think about right now, is where are we? Where are people thinking right now? And how can we help get them through that, either through communication or more professional learning? And then the last phase of that is what we call levels of use. It's behavioral. Are people actually acting on those behaviors we wanted to see? And that involves gathering different data points. And I think that's something that's going to be really interesting to look at as we move into the next semester and then even into the 21-22 school year, of how can we leverage all these amazing data points we have to see where change is really being I think implemented well, and then how can we replicate that? So those are some of my favorite things. Just to get back to Julie Andrews, those are a few of my favorite change things.
No, and absolutely. I mean, it's a lot to unpack, but I think for me, Kelly, when I think about that, a couple of things that really resonated are the why, right? If you have people that are wondering the why, it's a really big red flag. It's really going to impact the rollout of whatever we're going to do as a district moving forward after COVID. I had a district recently tell me that, a public school district that has never done anything virtual, they are already considering having a virtual school as an option for students beyond COVID, because they have learned that some students are just thriving in a remote world where they're not in a seat for 8 hours a day. I've read something else recently where districts are concerning, seat time was always a big thing that we talked about. How important is seat time if I have a kid that isn't in a seat anymore, but is thriving in these worlds? So to look
Yeah.
at the change management pieces that Kelly's discussing, the one chart where it has all the different colors was my favorite, where it talks about here are the concerns, and then this might be what's missing. So we hope that for you all that look at that, what we want to do there is just really give you some tools to take back to your district as you start having conversations around, okay, this is what we had to do. This is what we've learned. What do we want to do moving forward? So when we talk about that communication and collaboration that's going to happen internally is obviously incredibly important. And one of the other things you talked about was collecting the information and what type of decisions are we going to make once we have the information that we need. So Matt, what are some of the best practices that you are seeing as districts are managing change in our challenging world today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Justin. So as I reflect back on, the previous 6, 8 months working with schools, districts, my own family, I've got a wife who's a teacher and two daughters. I would say one of the common threads of really the organizations that have successfully implemented change in a short term and then, building long-term success has been the collection of formative or really quick data and information that they can get. And really, while we often think about the collection of data, we do think about students, and that's critical because ultimately the change management that we're talking about, the end goal is to positively impact student achievement, right? So we need to understand if students are making progress and these instructional practices, strategies, change that we're doing and what impact. So that is certainly there. So I am seeing less of a say reliance on a state assessment, right? Where it's a big look back of, okay, how did we do, and more of ongoing adjustments that may need to be implemented. And in addition to that, I would say another just encouraging element that's coming out is, okay, so yes, with those kids, with the instructional, how they're doing, but looking at some of the why is looking more at the whole child. So it's been very encouraging. And again, I just applaud my own daughter's district who are implementing some social emotional learning components of just gauging the students. Where are they in this time of disruption that they may need some support? Because obviously if their basic needs aren't being met, they're going to have a hard time learning. So that ongoing, just recognizing the disruption and that ongoing collection, it's just been encouraging to see that with the students. And I would also just say, really the expansion of that to the staff. Again, just my wife is a teacher, and I've seen other districts doing tools of gauging how are teachers doing, where do they need support as we go into change. Ultimately they, as the boots on the ground, are the ones going to be implementing that. So just understanding, do they have the support they need? Do they have the avenues of communication and collaboration that are there? And then finally, I'll just mention with the families as well, is whether that's, gauging what's working, what's not, what supports they need, all the way from the necessities of, delivering school food to instructional tools, but, ultimately collecting that data and then acting on it. So for me, again, I would just say it's been a through line for the schools and districts that have really adapted quickly. And then again, I just see it as a net positive moving forward, because those are all, important aspects that can build a strong foundation for any change and proactive, initiatives moving forward.
No, and I think those are great summaries. And one thing I would highlight is, and it's not against the kids, but right, when we talk about data and collecting information, it's always student centric. Nothing wrong with that. I love the passion that's coming, that I'm seeing in education around educating the whole child, something that I've always thought was incredibly important. And maybe we needed an unfortunate circumstance to really shine a flashlight on that. But something else that you mentioned, Matt, was, getting communities and teachers input on the change is going to help the buy-in with the change model that Kellie was referencing earlier. She referenced a technical change versus an adaptive change. Technical change is really more dictated, things that you say, this is what we're going to do, and maybe we're going to change our email platform. That decision's made, everyone adjusts. That's kind of what education has been like. This is what the district's going to do. They let parents know. And this time, collecting the information on how parents are feeling, what's working, what's not working, and working for the teachers. That's more of an adaptive change, what's going to get more people inspired, engaged in the district. And then as you try to make adjustments moving forward, our hopes for you is that it's going to be easier to make some big shifts that maybe you want to take as a district. So the last thing we want to talk about is continuing to build on that family component. And as you all are trying to connect with your families, it's probably a challenge, right? There's a parent portal probably with your student information system that you use, and you might be struggling to get high engagement out there. So I'm going to go to Jason and ask, what type of tools, Jason, are you seeing families use to really engage them more and get folks, whether it's on a mobile app or in their parent portal in their student information system? What are some things that you're seeing that have been successful?
I have a child in high school as well, a junior. And in addition to what I'm seeing our district do, which is try to bring more tools into our SIS parent portal for ease of access. But I think everyone out there has seen a lot more reach out and engagement with parents. A lot of surveys went out at the beginning of the year because we had to learn about what are your preferences for learning styles. Are you going to send your student back to school if given that choice? And I think schools saw the power of that survey tool maybe more this year than they may have in the past. And so that reach out, that communication with parents, the involvement of parents. So with Kellie and Matt's discussions about change management, and what that means for school staff, that's obviously critically important, but parent involvement as well. I think hopefully a lot of our schools have learned this year is really critical. I always think about schools that I've helped roll out standards-based grading to, and strategies for rolling out standards-based grading. And it's not the kind of thing you just spring on parents and say, okay, we're doing this thing called standards-based grading that a lot of parents have never even heard of, don't understand. That's not how I was graded when I went to school. So this obviously is not significant, relevant. It can't be real because I didn't go to school that way, right? All those challenges that schools face when they're trying to roll out new education initiatives, it all comes back to family engagement and making sure parents are involved in that decision process. I thought my school district, when they rolled this out years ago when my kids were in elementary school, they did one grade at a time. So my kids kind of rolled forward with that, but they clearly communicated home to parents. They had, conferences we could attend, meetings we could attend. I went to one. Attendance was abysmal, I must say, of my fellow parents, that not more were interested to come learn about this big change. But the ability to be involved and to be engaged, I think, is always critical when you're rolling out new initiatives, especially that impact the children.
Absolutely. Those are all great points. And when you talk about getting information out for parents to have access to, you want to make sure, that your student information system is configurable and flexible in that way so that you can get this information, collect the forms data. I think one of us was talking about earlier that there was actually a tool that our student information system for our home district actually had the ability to go out and sign up for parent conferences, and get some information. You want that flexibility in the SIS that you offer, and whatever that is that you use, you just want to make sure that you have options to connect with families that, again, reach them on a computer, but probably more importantly, right, that mobile phone, right? Everyone is using everything on that device. So I want to thank all of you for joining the show. And when I think about, kind of a thought to think of moving forward is the one piece that Kellie talked about was data. We talked a little bit about it with Matt, and I really want to encourage you all to start looking holistically at the information that you see. When I'm meeting with districts, the districts that I have seen be very successful throughout this implementation were obviously prepared for virtual learning, right? That was the given. Anyone who had a jump start on using a learning management system, this was something that really helped you excel. But I'm seeing districts that are taking their data across silos, bringing the information together so they can really judge and analyze how their dollars are being spent. Hey, the CARES funding was phenomenal for education. We saw districts across the country really focus on, okay, what tools can we use to get our education, our kiddos involved and keep their learning going? What's going to happen when that money is no longer available? You want to make sure you can look at the data points across the district and understand the impact of those tools, pick the ones that are going to be the most valuable for you, while also justify, hey, these ones were the most successful, and I had the data points to confirm that. Student engagement, parent engagement, teacher engagement, bringing information across your silos is really going to help you do that. And I was hearing districts talk yesterday on a council that I was a part of, where they were really saying, it's been a daunting task. And I think a lot of districts have thought about this, but it's something they're really going to put some chips in that basket in 2020 and 2021, because again, there's been so much that has altered everything that we're doing. And the best way to really get folks to support the change, whether it's a student, staff, family, is to have the data there to support the initiatives that you want to take on after we can finally make our way through COVID. So we want to thank everyone again for your time today. This was episode 4, talking about, the next chapter, getting beyond the changes that we've had. We want to be way more proactive than reactive than we had, and what we can do to be successful in schools across the country. So thank you again to Jason, Kellie, and Matt for joining us, and we will see you next time with episode 5. Have a good day.